And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everyone. I can hear Sukh laughing already. Welcome to the Training Journal webinar, or TJwow. We have a whole week of webinars, and this is our second one today. I am your host. I'm the Deputy Editor of Training Journal, and if you were here before the session, you just heard Debbie Carter introducing and saying welcome to everybody, and the fact that you can continue this conversation on Twitter if you want to. Now, conversation is the whole point of what we're here about. This is a quote from the late, great J. Cross about conversation, how it's powerful. And this is the whole point of our Training Journal webinars. I don't want them to be about slides and presentations. I want them to be about conversations, because anytime I go to a conference, a seminar, a training session, I think one of the best bits is having coffee, having lunch, having, maybe a drink in the pub and a chat. And that's what I want us to have today. You've got the chat window. Some of us have got our microphones open to join in, and that's what we're going to be doing. So please use that chat window anytime to converse with each other. We've also got a question and answer pod at the very bottom of the screen. So you can try this if you want to make sure we see a question. I'll do my best to see them all. But if you've got a specific question, please do drop them in there. If you want to speak, you can just raise that hand and we'll open up your microphone, or just let us know in the chat window. And also you can join us on Twitter. We have Debbie, our editor, who's going to be doing a great job on Twitter for us and trying to keep track of the conversation. And also TJwow is sponsored by Give Back UK. They're a charity who are creating inspirational video learning library, and that's really all about getting some stuff that's free to everyone in the third sector in the UK, and they're launching next month. So we're really looking forward to more from them. Now, all of our sessions will be available online for recording. Our session from yesterday is available on our webinars page, and also our up and coming sessions are on there, so you can go and have a look at what we've got coming up in the rest of the week. More importantly, what's going on today? We have three fabulous speakers with us. We have Sukh, Pabial, Michelle, Parry-Slater and Sotidis. They're all absolutely fabulous in what they do in learning and development, and I've got them together today because I think they've got a particular story and approach and things to share about social media for professional development. So we're going to get them to introduce themselves in just a moment. Let me bring in some webcams so you can start seeing who we are. Now, Sukh, I know you're not on a computer and it's running a little bit different for you, so you should be able to start sharing your webcam now, and if you can't, do just let me know, it's no problem. So we've got Michelle, Parry-Slater, Sotidis with us, and hopefully in a moment we'll have Sukh, Pabial on webcam as well. So guys, let's just do a really short introduction. Let's go to Michelle first. You did a little wave there and caught my attention, Michelle. So Michelle, just tell us very briefly, what do you do and what's got you going about?
Well, hi everybody. I run a small consultancy, Kairos Modern Learning, and what we do is we help people to move away from traditional classroom and to add on social learning, digital learning. Of course, social learning for me is about people learning from people, and we've done it forever. It's just about using these new tools, such as this webinar or such as Twitter or some sort of digital technology, to be able to have those wider conversations. So that's what I do, and that's what I get fired up about. So we can meet fantastic people all around the world, such as Con.
Thank you. What a nice segue that was. Can you hear me, Joe?
So
Okay, yep, you're loud and clear, Con.
Or otherwise known as, what is it, MIPS 180 or something like that? Anyway, I just know you come up, Michelle. My name is Sotidis. I'm a learning performance consultant, similar to Michelle, run my own little consultancy called Learn Coach Consulting, and that's also my Twitter handle, focusing on assisting organisations to develop strategies to support their performance, enhance performance and overcome performance issues with a focus on social learning, branding and profiling. And also I'm the moderator of Australia's premier L&D chat, Auslan, which is held every second Tuesday of the month at 8 PM Australian time, which is convenient for our UK friends.
It's almost like you planned it that way, Con. So what time is it for you in Australia at the moment, Con? Is it about...
Yeah, 6 minutes past 7. That's exactly right, Joe. So it's a good time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, Sukh, we can't see you on webcam at the moment, but I think we can hear you. Or maybe not. Sukh, are you there? Are you having problems? It seems like we're having problems right away, so that's not very good. So we'll introduce Sukh a little bit later on when he can make it. And we'll see how we go. So, Sukh, if at any point you're thinking, is this working, please do just interrupt us. We really want your valuable thoughts in the session today. Now, guys, in that chat window, please start kind of discussing things. What are you here for around that social media and professional development area? You've got the Q&A pod as well. And I think this social media area is really interesting because so many people kind of go, oh, it's all about sharing what I had for lunch, or who on earth wants to know about your insane dribblings and why would anybody want to read what you say? I think it's really interesting how people can go through that journey, and certainly I did. I remember going travelling to New Zealand about 1 million years ago, writing a blog, and at the time thinking, well, why would anybody want to look at this? Why would I share this? But it's all about actually keeping in touch. It's about relationships as well. And then when we look at this from a professional development point of view, I think it's quite interesting. So, Michelle, just tell us a little bit maybe about your journey with social media for...
Thanks, Jo. I was on Twitter a long time ago. My sister introduced me to it, and I didn't get it. I thought, what's it for? I don't understand. What can I do? What can I type in here that's interesting? And what got me hooked is Donald Taylor, actually. Donald's webinars. Am I allowed to advertise? It's like the BBC. Are we allowed to talk about others? But the webinars that Don does. The webinars that Dunn does on Thursdays as part of the Learning and Skills group, I saw that there was this Twitter thing going on in the background, LSG webinar, hashtag LSG webinar. So that's what sort of got me hooked in. And then I started to follow more people. And actually, Sukh was one of the first blogs I'd ever read. I'd never heard of blogging. And if any of you have ever read Sukh's blogs, you'll know that they're brilliant and inspirational and make you think. So that was one of the first ways in for me. And suddenly I went from this thing on Twitter I didn't really get to actually now I understand the value of it, that I can learn through it. And so it was that kind of leap. So I tended to keep Facebook, for example, for my family and friends, and Twitter for a professional environment, which was how I started. So we're talking 3-4 years ago now.
That's brilliant, Michelle. Thank you. And I think we're going to get onto that concept of work and personal and how sometimes they kind of get together. Now, before I come to Con and ask you a similar question, Sukh, we've got you on webcam now, which is brilliant. Hi. And it looks like you can hear me. Can we hear you, Sukh, more to the point?
Classic tech fail.
Yay. So don't worry.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though we tested it at like 9 o'clock this morning, these things happen. No worries, Sukh. So we were just having some introductions earlier on. So just tell us a little bit, Sukh, about what it is that you do in our world of learning and development, and what gets you maybe excited about everyone, the social media for professional development.
To be here, part of this, and so I head up organisation development for a housing association over in Camden in North London. I've been in learning and development for about, 14 years, 13 and a half years, 14 years, something like that, I don't know. And I've been in the social media space now for about 7 years, actively using Twitter and blogging as a way to share my thoughts and stuff that is going on out there. Yeah, and that was very kind of Michelle to talk about my blog like that. Thank you very much, Michelle. That's very kind of you. Actually, I remember meeting Michelle for the first time at a tweet up about a year and a bit ago. It was after a CIPD conference, I think it was, or after a learning tech conference. It's probably 2 years ago, actually. And I think I remember the look of shock on her face when she kind of realized that I recognized her name. And it was quite an amusing moment.
It was a little bit like meeting a famous person. I was a little bit of a fangirl. I was like, oh. Don't you think, Sukh, that actually when we do meet in real life, all of us who connect on Twitter particularly, and in other communities as well, but when we meet in real life, I now read tweets from you in your voice, and that actually adds another layer of advantage. So that's one of the, for me, the conferences really add value there, because we can really get to know people, you know, sort of, I often think that 140 characters, it's the essence of somebody. So to then add that layer of meeting them in real life really adds value.
Yeah, I do. I agree. And like,
Brilliant. Thank you, Michelle. So,
no,
Con,
sorry, I was going to bring in Con there as well and just say that, you know, it's
sorry,
great
Sukh, you
to
carry on.
have Con in it as part of the chat, because it's, you know, he's somebody who I've spoken to on Twitter loads, and, you know, we have lots of chats about lots of things. So it's great to finally, you know, meet Con and know, you know, who he is in this way. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Sukh. I really appreciate that. Look, going back to the question you asked, Joe, around my experiences on Twitter. Twitter started in 2006, and I joined in 2009, so I was a bit of a latecomer onto it. So I've been on it now for about 7 years. And interesting how Michelle and Sukh were talking about when they met in real life. For me, the eye-opener for Twitter, and this is a good story that I share because it just tells you the power of what Twitter can do. I was on a plane coming back from Canberra to Melbourne, and the plane had taxied, and the pilot says, okay, you can get your bags now, so you can turn on your phones, call your cab driver. So I've got my bag, got my phone, and the first thing I do, you know, whether it be wake up in the morning, get off a plane, is check my Twitter feed. So I check my Twitter feed, and I'm looking at my Twitter feed, and there's a guy next to me just getting his bag, and he's looking over my shoulder. And the first thing I thought was, what a sticky beak. What's he doing looking over my shoulder? Anyway, he wanted to get a closer look as who I was. And so the next thing is I get this tap on the shoulder, and he says to me, hey, you're not Learncoach, are you? And I just looked at him and said, what? He goes, you're Learncoach, aren't you? And I said, yes, that's me. He goes, mate, I follow you. I've got 3,500 followers, so I don't remember everyone. But he goes, I follow you. And he goes, oh, great to finally meet you in real life. And I said, oh, magnificent. So I said, who are you? I looked him up, you know, I thought, oh, thanks for that. So then I went back and, as I was in the cab, tweeted, that was great to meet one of your Twitter followers in real life. But that, for me, was just an amazing moment and an experience that I'll never forget, had an impact on me, but also I'll use it as a story about the impact that such a tool like Twitter can have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Con. And I think that's a really interesting viewpoint, and the chat window is getting going already really well, and some fantastic stuff that you're sharing here, guys. Rachel, a little while ago, said that she's joined Twitter super recently, hoping to use it and blogging to continue my personal development after I finish my studies, which is brilliant, Rachel. And what you also add there, Rachel, is that you're saying you find Twitter great to have conversations with other learning and development and people, especially as a standalone HR professional. I think this really goes into that point about conversations. So how can we use Twitter for conversations? It's 140 characters, it's public, it's broadcast, and I'd really like to just pick up on that point that Rachel's saying there about Twitter for conversation. So let's go back to Con first of all, because you've started that with the kind of talking about meeting people in real life. How do you have conversations on Twitter, Con, and what's the value for you?
Okay, I tend to go on mute to allow the others not to get noise from my headphones. Look, the way I create conversations is by sharing and providing some appropriate content. I retweet a lot, and what I'm trying to do more and more is retweet with a comment if it's allowed, as in if the characters allow. I think you create conversations by providing your followers and the people out there interesting content. The other thing I use a lot is hashtags. By using the hashtag feature and using some creative wording, I think you can start honing in on particular individuals that are interested in a particular topic, and or others who may not be interested in the topic but also are keen to see what you're saying. So I think creative writing skills, and I always say you need to practice this a bit and be able to convey a message succinctly and to the point, but also using hashtags to pinpoint and target conversations or threads that others may be interested in. I'll hand it over to Michelle and see what she got to say.
I think you're right there with the hashtags. Twitter can be a very noisy place, so it can be difficult for people to sort of filter out and find out where the good stuff's at. So the hashtags and following people on lists as well can be really useful. So there's tools within Twitter that allow you to support that, and there's tools without Twitter. So people use Hootsuite and other types of software in order to be able to filter. So those things are really helpful. But I have to say the hashtags for me is one of my biggest ways of filtering through and getting to have actual genuine conversations. So the tweet chat that you mentioned, Con, the OzLearn, and of course there's hashtag LD Insight on a Friday morning in the UK at 8 o'clock in the morning. Those conversations are really, really useful. For me, obviously, last year I ran a hashtag No Plasters, and Joe made the good point there. Twitter is broadcast, so you're actually offering a conversation. I like to think of it a little bit like improvisation, where you make an offer. So you put your broadcast out there, and people do or don't pick up on it. And if they do, great. Make sure that you go back, make sure that you actually genuinely converse. I think where Twitter fails, and especially a lot of marketeers do this, is they just broadcast. They don't make an offer. They don't invite conversation. They don't invite people to comment. They don't offer something that might be controversial in order to actually get a conversation going. So yeah, for me, it's lists, hashtags, and actually get stuck in, have a conversation. Sukh, how about you?
So I agree with all of that, right? I mean, there's good ways to be able to engage on Twitter, and over the years, I've found that kind of over and above any kind of tool or any kind of way that you use it, the primary thing that you kind of, if you want to use it for your kind of professional development and your personal development, is around the sharing piece that Con said, and as Michelle just said, it's around the active engagement piece. It's great to, it's fine to be what they call a lurker in the space. Consume the content, get what you need, do what you need to do with it, which is fine. But that doesn't really help you actually learn how to have those conversations in the same space. And that's the piece which those Twitter chats, I think, can be a really useful and safe place to have those types of open conversations that you might not normally have. And certainly when I've been involved in different chats, and also end up being, when you start to converse with people a lot, like with Michelle, we've gotten to know each other quite well. And I'm very comfortable now to be able to just raise things with her directly and say, hey, Michelle, what do you think of this? Because I've just read it and I want to know your thoughts on it. And that's just, it's kind of a natural, organic way that these things develop, right? And so instead of it just becoming a broadcast tool, it can then become an actual collaboration tool, which many people just may not realize that Twitter can enable that and allow for that to happen.
Thank you, Sukh. I think that conversation is really important, and that's the fundamental part of, I think, any good quality networking or relationship building. So in the case of Twitter, we're talking about kind of 140 characters, so it's very short, and also the fact that it's broadcast, and that actually can be really good. You can start having a conversation between two people, and suddenly others jump in. It's really valuable, I think, at that point. What I'd like to have a look at is just step back for a moment from Twitter, although that's a really useful tool to talk about, and just think about why should we use the whole concept of social media? Why don't we just go to work, do our thing, read magazines or not, and why even enter that social media space? I think that's a quite important one in terms of actually putting ourselves out there and getting involved. I think we can consume, as Sukh has said, but why get involved in the first place? So let me start.
It's like I read your mind, Joe, because just before you asked that question, I just popped into the chat there. Ultimately, it's social learning. It's people learning from people. So it's an opportunity for, often in a company, you're just the one L&D person. You might work in HR or you might work in an operational unit, but you're actually just that one person. So where can you get your inspiration? Where can you get your learning? And you can do that where people are, where people like you are, so community. And that might be Google+, it might be Facebook, it might be lots of different places in an online space. So for me, I was one person in a corporate company, so I needed to be able to find and connect with like-minded people. So it's about networking. That's what I think the value really is.
Thank you very much. So let's jump to Con and see, do you have anything else to add to that? Do you disagree with Michelle, maybe? So Con, let me...
Can you hear me now, Joe? Yes, okay. Great. Well, I think, look, it's life's a lifelong learning journey. I think no one is the fountain of all knowledge. And like Michelle was saying, it's about continuing to learn, continuing to grow, continuing to develop. Whether it be about how to build a paper boat, or whether it be about how to develop a strategy for your organisation, or whether it just be about how to implement something like a social learning initiative in your organisation. I think it's about also the concept of working out loud. We need to start knocking down those feelings and fears around, if I put something out there, someone's going to judge me. At the moment, from what I'm seeing, along with all my followers and people that I interact with, it's good to come out there and talk about what you're doing. It's embraced, and people are acknowledging and even celebrating people that are sharing about what they're currently doing. So it's about what we need to embrace, is because it gives you a platform to share, it gives you a platform to interact, it gives you a platform to test, it gives you a platform to pilot, it gives you a platform to start, putting out some teasers around the things you're doing, how you're doing it, and also gives you a platform to receive feedback, receive input, and also to continue the conversation offline with the individual. So I think it's an opportunity that you shouldn't let go, and it's one of those opportunities that just comes along once in a lifetime, and you need to embrace it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Con, and I think you highlight that really well, the fact that you're in Australia and very sadly, none of us have actually met you face to face in person, but you're a really good example of making that connection through, in this case, Twitter, and building on that. And we've actually, I'm sure you won't mind me sharing, Con, that we've actually become quite good friends. We've actually really kind of built on that professional level as well, about supporting each other in various ways, to the point that I know I message you going, oh my God, I feel rubbish, and you give me a little pep talk and all that's great. So there's lots of different levels to that there. So Sukh, I'm going to come to you in just a second and build on this, but in the chat window, some really good responses on this as well, about why get into this social space. Janet Webb, you say it gives you access to a network that you wouldn't be able to connect with any other way, which I think is really important. Kevin, you also say it's also a great way to get a different viewpoint. Organisational culture can get overpowering, and a fresh idea is always good. So thank you very much for those comments, really good. Now, Sukh, partly a little bit to address that question of why get in this social space, but also recently you wrote a really good blog about how you're kind of learning.
Happy to. Just in case people are wondering why I'm doing this, it's because I'm on the mobile, and so I'm trying to look at the chat window and different things on here at the same time, so apologies if it seems like it's wavy and jumpy. That piece that I wrote was about how I approached, when I started using Twitter, I didn't know what I was going to get out from it. I didn't know how I was going to develop my use of it and what it was going to help me to do better. And as I started getting involved in those types of chats more and sharing my own stuff and my own thoughts, and people started to respond to those, it wasn't just that people were responding, it's that we were having very regular conversations about stuff. And it started to move beyond that, where you start to just naturally support one another's thinking in some ways, and you support how people, what they say, what they think, and actually there's something in the chat window I want to respond to actually, which is, I think it's Sharon, who's raised a thing around how to share information and how to challenge constructively in 140 characters. I don't think there's any kind of easy answer to that, Sharon. It's a really hard thing to do on Twitter, because primarily the main barrier that gets in the way is that it's a text-based platform, and so you lose all sense of tone of voice, of emotion, of context around what that person's trying to say. And so I like the response from Gillian, which is you need to consider how can you do that with tact and care, and that's a really difficult thing to do. It's something which I personally struggle with, because there's sometimes I just want to rant at people because I'm really annoyed at what they've just said, and I have to remember that what they may have said isn't necessarily what they may have meant, because I've missed loads of things. I've missed content. I've missed context. I may not truly understand who they are as a person. And it's when I have that with people, and so there's certainly people within the group that we're talking to now on the panel who, I could do that with these guys, right? I could challenge them openly and they would understand my intent behind that, because I've developed that relationship and we've developed that sense of, I get who you are, I get what you mean, and I understand your normal context for working in. So I think there's some things there around when it comes to that sharing of knowledge. And there's a concern in the chat about, would people troll you? I think in the space that we work in, I have very rarely seen any kind of trolling happen, and that's mostly because we talk about very safe topics, right? We talk about learning, development, the workplace. These are seriously safe topics, really not controversial, and your research may flag up and show interesting things, but people are really not going to get het up about it and start abusing you because of what you're choosing to share about it. If you were talking about other topics which can invite more controversy, so things like gender politics or the wars that are happening, or all these types of things, that will attract trolling because of those types of emotive topics. But the topics that we talk about, yeah, not so much.
Thank you, Sukh. And I've got a question for you specifically from the Q&A pod, and then a really great question to move us on away from Twitter. So Frank Halberg, who was here yesterday, thank you, Frank, for coming back. It's lovely to have your great questions again. Frank says, question for Sukh. From what you shared in the published video conversation, oh, it's just disappeared off my screen, just a second. The published video conversation leading up to this webinar, I learned that you work with housing. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Can you please share how you use social media in your work? What interests me is not least how people who use apartments, houses, use social media to work with or learn from architects, designer, craftsmen, etc. to improve work and living environment.
So in the in the space that I work in, I don't have that much influence in what we do with our external partners. We have a comms and marketing team who have, over the last year, developed a much stronger social media presence, and that's because they've realized that there was a lot of content coming through and a lot of comments coming through from our residents and from our partners through the social media channels that they just weren't responding to, and they realized that there was just so many missed opportunities, it just wasn't great for them. And so they've done a much better job at purposefully using tools like Twitter and Facebook to be able to share and engage in content in different ways.
Thank you, Sukh. So I think it's an interesting area where you can work in an industry, but perhaps not necessarily focus on that industry all the time, because often our job is the learning and development part of that industry. So it's a different way around. And Michelle's just shared something in the chat window for you, Frank, so hopefully that will help you out. So, okay, I've got a really great question in the chat pod, the question and answer pod from Linda Trigg. Linda, you say you've talked a lot about Twitter, which we have. We've talked a few different things, but we're halfway through our webinar and we have focused a little bit on Twitter, you're right. You say, what about other social media? And I think that's a really good point. So we've mentioned blogging a little bit. We haven't really mentioned Facebook or LinkedIn that much. I know in the chat window we've mentioned Slack. So let's talk a little bit in the chat window and amongst our webcam speakers here as well about what other social media we use and what the benefit is for that. So Con, let me unmute you. Tell us a little bit about other social media you use.
Gotcha now? Okay. All right. Other stuff that I use, of course, LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's very much a professional network. The unfortunate thing is that I'm seeing LinkedIn become another Facebook with people putting up quizzes and move these matchsticks and what does 7 plus 15 times 6 equal? It's starting to disappoint me, but that's probably people that are posting those things. So what I do is I just try to avoid those things. So LinkedIn is another powerful medium that I use. Slack, I'm just getting into Slack. Yammer, I've done a small implementation of Yammer at a professional membership body, and that's been going very, very well. People are starting to use it. I've also been part of the American Society of Training Development, now known as the Training Development or Talent Development Society. They've got a Yammer network, which is very, very effective, and it's categorized in different groups. Slack, I'm just, like I said, getting into. I use quite a few curation tools, and that's probably a separate matter altogether, but that's also a bit of a social media activity. But at the end of the day, I also use Facebook. I've started to use Facebook a lot more, but that's more for the market that I want to target. It's important, no matter what social platform you use, keep in mind what is the outcome you wish to achieve. So someone like me as a freelancer, I work with a lot of small business here locally in Australia. So I'm looking to work with those entrepreneurs, those solopreneurs, those small, medium organizations that are starting up. So I use Facebook for that. If I'm looking to get into more of that sort of corporate market, I will go into LinkedIn a lot more and Twitter. So if you keep the outcome in mind, what you want to achieve, then determine what technology and platform you want to go on, you start making progress as to what you really want to achieve out of social media, whether it be for profit, whether it be for leisure, whether it be for learning, whether it be for growth, and all those aspects.
Great, thank you very much.
Just unmuting me, that's the bit I forget. Depends on what the outcome is, like Con was saying. So I said earlier that I've traditionally split Facebook for friends and family and Twitter for work purposes. But as Sukh's already talked about, I'm now friends with people that I've met through these other channels. So I've started to introduce people to Facebook. I think it was Ian Pettigrew, Kingfisher coach, who's sort of, we had a conversation at an unconference about the differentiation, but he made the good point that it's about purpose, it's about outcome. So I use Yammer, for example, because I'm a volunteer with Hearing Dogs for Deaf People, and so they want to connect all of their volunteers together. So, thinking about what the outcome is, thinking about what will motivate people, and thinking about purpose will help you determine what tool is the right tool. I'm part of Perry Tim's iPractice, and we use G+, Google Plus, for that platform. So that's just a space where we can share in a private group. I think, say private, there's about 130 people in that group now. So build the community, not necessarily around the tool, but focus on what the purpose of the community is for, and then the right tool can emerge from that. So I've got lots of different channels that I dip in and out of. The challenge for me there is that I don't have the time to go in and out of them all of the time. So you have to choose, and that's where the curation piece comes into play, because you can follow and curate and go back to stuff so you're not missing stuff. So one of the things I use is Nuzzle, N-U-Z-Z-E-L, which I find really useful for what's been shared. What have I missed that's been shared? And that's blogs, that's lots of people posting around the same thing. And so you tend not to miss things. But ultimately, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Google+, whether it's Facebook, the good stuff stays around. So don't ever worry that, I've got to keep up, I can't, it's too busy. Because that good stuff hanging about, it keeps coming back. And even on LinkedIn, the conversations where people are getting really fired up, that will stay at the top of your feed and keep coming back to your feed as the conversation gets bigger and bigger. So I never worry about kind of missing stuff. I always think if I'm meant to, a little bit of serendipity, if I'm meant to know about it, I'll know about it. I kind of liken it to going to the pub. You know, when you rock up at the pub, your friends have been there for half an hour before you and they've been having a really good chat and you haven't been involved in that. But if it's that interesting, you'll keep talking about it. If it's not that interesting, you'll talk about something else. And then, of course, when you leave, your friends are still there. They'll continue to have your conversation or they'll have another conversation. And that's just the same with all of these social tools. It's just whilst you're there, get the value out of it that you can get out of it. Does that make sense? That's what I do.
It does, Michelle. Thank you. And I think we've got that almost that fear of missing out. And I, being social creature that I am, I was just like, I must get to the pub first so I can be involved in all of those conversations. But the reality is, you're always telling me to chill out, Michelle. But I think the reality is you can't be involved in all of those things all the time. And I was reading something recently and somebody put, oh, thank you to all these people. Like, oh, am I on the list? It's like, well, of course I'm not on the list because actually I haven't invested time in that relationship, so I can't be expected to be there.
I'm going to be honest and say that I'm quite limited, actually. I'm quite exclusive in my choice of social tools. I pretty much go to Twitter as my main place to do most social media type stuff. LinkedIn is becoming a much more regular place for me to visit these days. Interestingly, about Con's observation there about how it's becoming more of a very much kind of a Facebook-esque type thing where you're getting these puzzles and those kind of odd things. I read an interesting piece in that recently where someone was saying that it's actually becoming more of a personal learning network space now. So where it used to be just be kind of the professional aspect of stuff, now it's starting to be, you're starting to actually understand what interests people in different ways. For some people, that's, you know, it's the puzzle type things. For others, it's sharing Keanu Reeves's poster that I've seen on LinkedIn bizarrely. And you just kind of go, okay, I can see that you're trying to share different things. And it's potentially just around the fact that people are missing whether or not they should be, what it is they're trying to say when they're sharing certain pieces. So on Twitter, for example, there's a question in the chat window about, do you have more than one account? I did try and do that for a bit, and I just got lost with it. I couldn't really dedicate the time I needed to the two accounts to be able to build better relationships across both. So I just thought, well, at this stage of my life and career where I'm at, I only need one, right? If anybody wants to get in touch with me about something, it's because they're getting in touch with me about something. I don't have a corporate entity that I need to brand and get out there. Not right now. At some point in the future, maybe, I don't know, I'll think about it and I'll see. So I do tend to be across those two spaces in the main. And clearly I also have a blog as well, so WordPress is my blog platform of choice. I've also experimented with Medium, which is another blogging platform. Much more shareable, actually, and much more invitational and inclusive when it comes to the design of how they've done that. And then LinkedIn Pulse I've experimented with as well.
Wow, quite a few different things, Sukh. Thank you for sharing on all of those. There's been a whole load of stuff going on in the chat window about this and some really good questions coming through. I have captured them, so please don't worry. We're going to try and speak about those. Now, Neil, I'd like to unmute your microphone, Neil Gavin, because we've been talking a little bit in the chat window about Facebook and about how using that for our professional network. And there's been conversations in the chat window about that crossover between personal
pretty much
and
along the same lines
as
kind of
like,
Michelle
well, do we have
Sukh and
separate
Con
Facebook
I've already
for
covered,
professional
to be
or one for
honest.
personal? What are your thoughts around that, Neil?
I was surprised to see friend requests start to pop up in my Facebook from my Twitter network, from my professional network. And I have been a little bit more selective about whether or not I accept those requests. So apologies to anybody that has reached out and I haven't necessarily accepted it. That's no reflection. It's just about, for me, some of it is about clutter, picking up Sukh's point. But there are so many channels, and I think one of the key things for me in this is about, and as Janet and I were just talking about in the chat panel there, it's about authenticity and about showing up consistently in all of those channels, if you choose to engage therein, if you like. And to an extent, I've done that by, I hate to bring the term up, but I think it's what I do, is kind of manage the personal brand. And my personal brand in social media is Neil Gavin UK. And I tend to try and show up under that brand name, if you like, in all those different channels. And that tends to, from my perspective, put a kind of label on it and so manage people's expectations about what that communication can be and the kind of tone and the content that people can expect in those places. And that's extended over into, to pick up the point about curation, I've also extended that over into my curation channels, into my blog. So it's all under, if you like, that personal brand. So in Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, in Slack, I tend to use all that. And similarly in the curation tools like Storyfy and Pinterest and things like that. So that it just starts, it creates, if you like, a space that people will know what to expect of me, if you like, in that space. And it also kind of sets my expectation of how I would like people to interact with me. So long answer to a short question.
Absolutely excellent answer, Neil. Thank you. And I'm going to keep you on the line. I've got a question for Slacker for you in just a moment. But with what you've been saying there, some good points coming up, and Helen loves what you've been saying. Now, in the chat window, Peter Davis says, I think the brand point is one well made. It's important that your brand is defined. But with us consultants, our personality has to come through as well. Let's not forget that people buy relationships. Very well said, Peter. And I think that's a point more broadly, actually. It doesn't matter if you're freelance, independent consultant.
Yeah, that's all right.
I think that's about that professional development.
So,
and I think that's probably a slightly other conversation. Now, Sukh, I know you've got your hand up. You probably want to say something about this. Do you want to say something about this before I ask Neil about Slack?
A bit more sense in this space.
Go ahead.
Is that what can be useful to think about is that your brand is an ever-evolving thing, and it's hard to just keep it as a static thing of today I define myself as this, and therefore that's what I'm going to go out to the market with. Today I define myself as this, that's what I'm going to go out to the market with. Tomorrow it might be completely different because of something different I've learned and new I've experienced and whatever else it might be. And part of that authenticity piece is being able to just be open and honest about that and sharing what you're thinking with your network so that they're not just seeing models and theories and other stuff that you're putting out there. It's also about your thinking. That helps people to make those connections to your brand and who you are, because as Peter quite rightly says, people buy people, right? They buy the relationships that you have. And they do that because of they understand that thinking process and they understand what's going on inside your head, moreover and beyond the models and the theories. And I think to kind of my internal role that I have here as a head of, in my internal role, and I don't buy suppliers because of their models and theories. I really don't care about your models and theories. I bring people in because of the relationships that I have with them, but more so their thinking that they bring to me, and what that can enable me to do in the organization. That's the piece which matters more for me.
That's an absolutely great point, Sukh. Thank you so much for that. And that's really what this is about, I think, for me as well. It's not about, you know, how many followers can I get and how many tweets can I do. It's about what relationships I can develop for my personal learning, for my personal development, and building those relationships. And the way I look at it is, if I happen to get work out of it at some point, that is a huge bonus, but that's never necessarily the aim in the first place. And there's loads of chat going on about that. I do want to go back to Slack though. So Neil, I'm just going to unmute you again and bring you into that conversation. So we mentioned Slack earlier on, and actually we've got a question that's come up in our question and answer pod from Sharon Green. So Sharon, thank you very much for your question. You say, can I have a dummies 140 character introduction to Slack?
No pressure there.
What is it? I'm not sure it's a dummies version, Sharon. I know that.
I'm fairly recent to Slack and was really invited into it through my consultancy work with a couple of clients who are starting to use it, for their own internal channels. And the big selling point for them in that respect has been, it appears to have cut down on internal emails and things like that, because it brings the immediacy of instant chat type interactions with people, because it also allows you to share files, it allows you to link to external websites, so it brings more of an immediacy into the conversation again, rather than what has tended to happen, and certainly my experience was in the corporate world, that email tends to be used as a buck passing tool, to jump the monkey from my shoulder to somebody else's shoulder and then move on. Whereas I think by using the kind of instant messaging approach, you're starting a conversation. And anecdotally, I've been led to believe that it's cut right back on internal emails, and also even in interaction with externals. I've also experienced being on a learning program which was run through Slack, almost as another phrase I hate, but a MOOC, a massive open online course. It was actually a tiny little open online course, but actually really extended my ideas about the potential for the tool in starting conversation, sharing resources, inviting comment and input, and being able to revisit on a regular basis as you go through, and that was spread over a couple of weeks. So I think it's a tool that I want to explore more. I'm seeing more of the clients that I'm working with starting to use it, and it's becoming quite a useful channel for that kind of dialogue and interaction.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil. Oh, I always do that at some point, don't I, Neil? I read your name as Niall, just as everybody does. I'm sure you get it so much. Thank you, Neil. I will say that a little bit better there. And I don't know, Sharon, if that was in 140 characters, but hopefully, Sharon, for you and for anybody else, that was a really good introduction. I haven't used it personally myself. Thank you, Michelle, for laughing at me. And I think that's a really nice, succinct way of looking at it. Now, we've got, gosh, just about 10 minutes left, and there's a few different questions here that I think are going to be useful to have a look at. One of these is around curation tools. So Gillian Caldecott, you asked, what are the most useful curation tools? Now, Con, I know curation is something that you're really interested in. Neil mentioned that just now. So,
okay,
Con,
curation. Well, curation is this particular skill set that I think it's important that we all start to develop and develop it really quickly. Although we hear the word content is king, I've sort of taken that a bit further and said curation is the queen. I think curation is going to be the thing that's going to set you apart in the learning development field, mainly because, and as the chat's been saying, YouTube, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are creating content on a regular basis. Curation is a skill where you take that content and you add some value to it and you reposition it somewhere in your organization that people can access it. So as an L&D person, or even as a business person, or even as a subject matter expert. You start looking at content, you start evaluating it, and you can do a lot of things. You can mash it up by adding some additional links. You can do it by some sort of rating or weighted index approach. There's a great little, what's his name, Riot's, I can't get his name, his surname right, but Rohit's Barwag, I think in India, content curation. He's got the sort of 4 levels of curation, which I can send you a link to the Joe for that. But the tools that I use for content creation is one I've come across more recently and one that I've been using on a regular basis. One I've been using on a regular basis is that one there, rightrelevance.com, which I put there in the Right Relevance allows me to curate content based on influences, based on subject matters, based on topics, and it's a very, very good tool to hone in on what you want. The other one I've recently used, which I find very, very good, and it's by the guys that make BuzzSumo, our friends Steve Rayson and Stephen Walsh, Anders Pink. Anders Pink is going to change the way curation is being done. And Michelle, I know you referred to one before, Novell, from what you were saying, I think it was. If you look at Anders Pink and get onto the beta testing of Anders Pink, you'll find it will change the whole way about the way you look at things. It brings in your RSS feeds, it brings in variety of feeds, but also can exclude particular domains. You can actually block particular domains. You can actually pick particular words. I'm very passionate about it because I started to use it at the moment, and it's very effective. There is other things there. There's Storify. There's that you can use. That's more about collating a Twitter chat, or maybe collating and bringing together some hashtags that relate to a particular conversation. Nazal, okay, that's the one. Anyway, I'm just looking at the chat while I'm trying to talk. They're the kind of 2 tools that I'll recommend. I think Right Relevance and Anders Pink are the ones that are my go-to tools for curation. And also, the other ways I curate is via hashtags, and I use an application called Eventifier, Eventifier.com, where you can create an event based on a hashtag, and it'll bring in all the blogs or anything that's shared via Twitter. Using that hashtag will come into this particular curation app, and you'll be able to just go through it and pick and choose the ones you want and follow up with them. Anyway, that's enough from me. I think I'll hand over to the other guys because I'm sure they've got some great ideas.
Wow, Con, that was
not
really...
around the curation piece, not directly. I tend to leave that to other people who do it much, much better than I do. So there's people out there who use Storify and Stupid and other curation tools, and they do such a good job of it. I kind of let people get on with it.
Brilliant, thank you. And I saw Michelle nodding there as well as very much a live person. And I think actually that brings out a really good point, is that we don't need to be across all of these things. We can pick something like Sukh said earlier on, you know, pick your platform and be there and do that really well. And as Neil said, it's about being kind of authentic, and I think Janet Webb mentioned earlier on being appropriate in those platforms. Whereas Con, you do a lot of that. I do a little bit of curation about bringing together ideas and being able to share those with people on themes and topics. So thank you very much. Helen, you say you've got to go. Thank you so much for coming along. We do have all of our webinar recordings on the Training Journal website. I will just share that. Gillian, you say thanks for that. I have a good list of curation platforms to explore now, and maybe that's something we can talk about in more detail later. Okay, so we do have a question about content marketing, although Peter, you have said maybe it's not a question for this forum, but I think it's a good point. So Peter in the chat pod originally asked, what are the panel's views on the world of content marketing? But also earlier on, Peter said in the chat window, what I've been getting used to over the last 4 months is how to link different social networking forums together. How do you use Twitter, Facebook, corporate, LinkedIn, websites, Google+, etc., and all the other things that we've been talking about to get larger audiences. So whilst I don't necessarily maybe it's not appropriate to focus just purely on content marketing and growing audiences.
You are
But I
making
think
sense.
that's part of that whole profession.
My issue with using social tools for content marketing is that content marketeers do it to sell stuff, whereas I think you get a better result when you do you engage in these platforms for no other purpose than to benefit other people. So rather than sell me or my company, I'd rather give it away. And the reason I'd rather give it away is because somebody somewhere who can't afford to buy it, buy me, buy my consultancy, can still benefit. And that way you actually get and build better, stronger relationships. So I don't know if Kevin is still on the session here, but Kevin May, for example, followed my No Plasters campaign last year. And Kevin, I eventually met him in real life because I purposely sought him out because he was such an avid follower, and we had a really interesting conversation around what benefit did you get. And he said the difference between somebody who shares a load of stuff, so content marketeers, is that ultimately they're never giving the good stuff. They're never actually sharing the value. They're just getting you to buy more of their stuff. Whereas he said, we could take one of your ideas and really thrash it about. And I was made up. I set out last year just to influence and help one person in post. And I know I did more than that, which was great. But for Kevin to say that to me was fantastic. Now, you know, I can't pay my mortgage with kudos, let's be honest. So there's a purpose for content marketeers. There's a purpose to have that space. I just wish that they would do it in a more giving and way. And some are. So Good Practice, for example, came out with their report just yesterday. It's fantastic. It's really great insight into the industry. Towards maturity, they come up with really fantastic material as well, which they share. So I think it can be done. And that way they get bigger, better, stronger, more loyal followings than somebody who's just pushing out, oh, top 10 tips for. You're like, oh, come on, you know, don't need another top 10 list. We need some value. We need to actually start a genuine conversation. So that's a little bit of a rant. Sorry about that.
No, but I think, as you said earlier on, blogs are for rants, and it's about...
I completely agree with Michelle, actually. You know, she said the right kind of stuff there. You know, content marketing is fine if you're trying to sell stuff. But the best content marketing I've seen is when people are just having fun with stuff and they're trying to share good stuff as well. Right, and in particular, what I remember back to, you know, a few years ago, Old Spice did that whole series of YouTube quick videos about the Old Spice guy, Old Spice guy, I can't remember. And it was a fantastic bit of content marketing, and it was responsive, and it was immediate, and it was really, really, really well done. And clearly, they're a brand, right? They're trying to sell their Old Spice aftershave. But it was great fun, and people really connected to it because of that. In the same way, I completely agree with Michelle that the Good Practice stuff that they've released yesterday is brilliant. I got the report in through the post, and I was so chuffed. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And all it is just a report, but it's the way that they've done it. They've done it with generosity, and they've done it without asking for anything in return for it. And that's what I'm enjoying about it. So where the content marketers do it well is when they can share things openly, like Michelle said, starts that conversation happening, and that's where you start to get genuine interaction and relationship building because of those types of approach.
Thank you, Sukh. Again, really nice roundup of the content and the discussion today. Thank you for that. And Peter, who kind of posed the question in the first place, said in the chat window just now, it's an interesting point Michelle was making, and I'm using that kind of content marketing approach mainly to build relationships. So I'm giving away a lot of content I've created. It's a difficult balance to achieve. So as Michelle said, it's all about building those relationships, and Sukh said as well, but at the same time, paying the bills is the ultimate goal, but it's how you get there, I think, is a really interesting point. So, Con, any last thoughts
Okay, on the
on
content
this
marketing one, I think Peter makes a good point, and following that, Michelle made a very good point
it would
about
help if I unmuted
the value add. For
I've
me,
been
it's about
muting
the value you add back into the
Michael,
conversation, and we talked about towards maturity and good practice. And one thing I do, because those people are so generous with their reports, I like to blog about them. So about earlier this year, I did a nice blog on the Towards Maturity report, because for me it's about, I read those reports and they've been so good to share that data and information. So the way I can add to the conversation, add value, and I don't think it's content marketing, I blog about it and give them my personal reflections, because when we all read something, we all have our different perspectives and slants on it. So when I read something, I try to give my personal opinion and view on what it is. Just quickly on the relation building one thing I think, and we run out of time, is we've overlooked a bit, is the power of video in social learning. I'm an avid Periscope user and an avid blabber. If you haven't used those tools, I think it's good to get onto them. And Periscope is really good for that relationship connection. It's in the moment, it's ad hoc, it's in your face, and it allows you to interact with the Periscoper. Blab, on the other hand, is a bit more open, and it's it can be subjected to some trolls. You want to use a bit of a word, but again, it gives you that conversation. And Joe, you and I were on one yesterday where we were able to have that conversation about reflections from the CIPD conference and from the LT UK conference. So guys, consider video and how you can want to use video in developing your personal relationships, but also as a social learning and development tool. I'll leave it at that, Joe.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What a fantastic end there. I could quite honestly carry on talking about this stuff all day, as I'm sure, apart from apart from the work that we've all got to get done, probably the rest of you could as well. I would like to say a huge thank you to Sukh Pabial, Michelle Parry-Slater, and Con Sotidis. You can see their links there. I've got a little links sections where you can go and copy and paste those, and loads of lovely comments coming through in the chat window saying thank you and some really good stuff. And hopefully, yeah, please do share all of your Twitter tags if you're kind of getting into that, or LinkedIn, and just go and find each other, connect with each other and have those conversations. So thank you guys for an interesting session. The recording will be available on our Training Journal website very soon, as will our other sessions. You can continue the conversation on Twitter if you want to. I've been seeing Twitter flying past on my iPad and not been able to catch up, so please do continue connecting with each other and having those conversations. And tomorrow, well, our next webinar is with Tim Royd and Claire O'Shea, and it's all about sales training.